Hi, everybody. Welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. I saw this article on Newsroom on the church website, and it stuck out to me because of the title, A Year of Milestones, Mourning, and Momentum, the Church of Jesus Christ in 2025. And it reminded me of something that I've been wanting to do. There is a certain class of what I consider second coming quotes that until today, I knew I wanted to keep track of these somehow, but I didn't know if I was going to start a separate spreadsheet for it or not. And I decided, it just clicked. I was like, oh yeah, I'll put it on my spreadsheet for second coming quotes, but I'll just have it as a new topic. And the topic is signs of the times. So everything else that I have on here so far, usually these quotes use the phrase second coming, or his coming, his return, hastening the work, things like that. But there are times that church leadership or articles like this one that we're about to read, they talk about things that are supposed to happen in the lead up to the second coming. And as people in the church, you don't necessarily think about the second coming as they read these things or hear these things said in general conference talks or wherever. At some level, it should register, oh yeah, these are signs of the times. I had this realization a while ago. I think it was with this talk by President Oaks. This was from the October 2022 General Conference. And I was like, you know what? He basically just listed off a bunch of signs of the times for anybody that's listening. So what I want to do, let's go through this first. So this was published on the 26th. It says, the past year was one of milestones, mourning, and momentum for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The days were punctuated with sorrow from tragedies such as those in Lesotho and Michigan, as well as joy and progress from expanded opportunities for service and the continued growth of the church around the globe. So again, there's a whole spectrum of people within church membership and their attitudes toward the second coming. I would think that as they read these things, even if they don't consciously think, oh yeah, sorrow and tragedies, these are second coming themes because you have the judgments of the Lord that are coming to the earth and the lead up to the second coming. It may register on a subconscious level at the very least. Wouldn't you say? I feel like it has for me ever since I was young. I've grown up in the church. And so I think for me, it always registered on some level. Okay, continuing. The church also experienced a change in leadership. President Russell M. Nelson died at age 101. And President Dallin H. Oaks was named the faith's 18th prophet and president. By the way, I have that highlighted just because there's been a number of people that I've talked to that don't necessarily talk about the second coming very much, but President Nelson's age when he turned, 100, 101, through my conversations with them, it was clear that it did affect them on some level. They saw it as something unusual, something that was meant to be, even though we may not have talked explicitly about the second coming. Okay, so it talks about, there's this section called Caring for People in Need, the 250 truckloads of food with 250 food banks because of the upcoming anniversary of the United States, the 250th anniversary, which is one reason I think next year is going to be big, by the way. It talks about the fact that one of the first food trucks went to Michigan because of what happened the day after President Nelson passed away. And then the next section, it just has like this list of signs of the times. Latter-day Saints also reached out in the wake of natural disasters, such as flooding in Central Texas and the Philippines, fires in Southern California and Peru, earthquakes in Myanmar, and I think messed this up, Vanuatu, and Hurricane Melissa in the Caribbean. You might say, well, these are just things that happen every year. There's disasters. And that is true. When it comes to me, this is just my opinion when it comes to signs of the times. I look at a few different things. I look for if it's something that's record breaking. I look for if it's something that happened on a special day. I look for anything with that event that may stand out as something out of the ordinary. Like there's just something about that event where it feels like the Lord is trying to communicate something, because that's the point of signs. It's a form of communication. Um, I look for those kind of things. It doesn't always have to be record breaking. Um, and even if it's something that happens every year, an earthquake, a flood, just because it doesn't affect you and me specifically, I guarantee the people that are affected by that event, that there's a portion of them that will have a spiritual experience and feel like the Lord is speaking to them. And so, anyway, oh, and another thing is when you have a greater frequency of events, like like for example, there was all this flooding that was going on in 2023, as well as wildfires. The wildfires in 2023 were just off the charts. There were big wildfires that year, and a lot of them, a lot of record-breaking wildfires. So when you have a cluster of events like that, or things start happening more frequently, I feel like that is a sign. So anyway, okay, so the church lists those off, and I think that this is just one way that the Lord can communicate with the church, even with people that aren't really in tune with the second coming, to get them thinking about the second coming. Even though the article is mostly talking about the church and humanitarian aid, emergency relief, and stuff like that. You have this part. This is something that impacted me. This year started off like really intense, in my opinion, with the fires in the Los Angeles area. There were a lot of interesting details to that. But in the aftermath, President Jeffrey R. Holland went down to California. He spoke to them. This was on top of other trips that he had made to like the Dominican Republic. I also think he made a trip to Arizona for an area conference or something. But this was one of the trips that he had made after his near-death experience, and I really admired that about him. By the way, I'm going to be publishing this at 10 a.m. Central, and so his funeral, I didn't check. I'm sure that you'll probably be able to watch it on YouTube, but from the time that I publish this, it's going to be 2 hours from now. So it's going to be at 11 a.m. Mountain Time and go until noon Mountain Time. Okay, and then we have this that happened during that young women's activity. I remember that making news. And let's see, and then Michigan again. Sorry, I was going to read these, and then we have this. I didn't really cover this story, but I'll read this one. And in the Philippines in November, fellow apostle Elder Patrick Kieran brought hope and comfort to survivors of Typhoon Tino and Super Typhoon Yuan or Uwan. Okay. So, all right. So I have gone ahead and I've added this to my spreadsheet called quotes, second coming. I'm going to start tracking anytime that, newsroom or church leadership talks about disasters or signs of the times, even if they're not explicitly talking about the second coming. Let's see. Let's go down here. I've added a couple more, but they were from 2022. I took a look at this spreadsheet called Timeline Phrases. I still haven't updated this completely from the October General Conference, but if you're new to the channel, this is a list of words and phrases and how many General Conference talks they've shown up in by year. So we're just going to talk about this column right here, column GB for signs of the times. This phrase showed up 3 times in 2022. And here are 2 of those talks. This is one of those talks, right? No, this is both from General Conference, April and October General Conference. One from President Nelson, one from President Oaks. Um, anyway, this is one, it's not quite as dramatic as some of the other words and phrases. You see a lot of signs of the times back in the 60s and 70s. It kind of dies off. There's a spike in 1992. And then after that, the next biggest spike is 2022. So it seems like for some reason that was on their mind in that year, maybe because of the previous 2 years, 2020 and 2021, and all the craziness of those years. One thing that this made me think about, I have a spreadsheet called Quotes, Common Misconceptions. This is currently row 37. The topic is signs, the misconception. These aren't signs of the second coming. We haven't seen anything yet. These aren't spectacular enough. Some people take that point of view when you try and talk about the things that are happening right now before our eyes. So I just want to read a few quotes from here. This is from President Thomas S. Monson, at that time, first counselor in the first presidency, April 2005 General Conference. He said, "We cannot afford to be complacent. We live in perilous times. The signs are all around us." It's already here. You guys, we've already had two world wars. We had a Cold War. We've had really crazy natural disasters and so many other things. We have this one. This is from that same General Conference, but this is Elder Robert C. Oakes of the Presidency of the 70. And he said, "Our prophet regularly points out that these are the last days. We know from the signs of the times that the end is drawing near. And Satan knows it as well." So that was back in 2005. Here we are 20 years later, and I do think that we're that much closer. I think that it's really soon, frankly, just based on everything that I've covered on this channel. And then we have President Hinckley. This is the October General Conference of that year, in a talk called "If Ye Are Prepared, Ye Shall Not Fear." I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he says, "If anyone has any doubt concerning the terrible things that can and will afflict mankind, let him read the 24th chapter of Matthew. Among other things, the Lord says," and then he reads those scriptures. We're already familiar with them. And then after he's done reading that, he says, "The plague or Black Death of the 14th century took millions of lives." It's really interesting that he's going that far back, because I've noticed that there's this general attitude among people, members of the church that look forward to the second coming. There's a general attitude that everything has to be for our viewing pleasure, in that we're the main character. So if it happened during the 1930s and 40s, well, that's nothing, because look what's going to happen to us. We're the main character. No, don't think back to the 14th century. That's too far back in the past. Those weren't the last days. They were. They were part of the last days. Not as far as the last dispensation, but ever since Christ left with in his ascension, you have the apostles that spoke about the last days. Back then, in the immediate aftermath of Christ's resurrection. So President Hinckley continues, "Other pandemic diseases such as smallpox have brought untold suffering and death through the centuries. In the year AD 79, the great city of Pompeii was destroyed when Mount Vesuvius erupted. Chicago was ravaged by a terrible fire. Tidal waves have swamped areas of Hawaii. The San Francisco earthquake in 1906 ruined the city and took some 3,000 lives. The hurricane that hit Galveston, Texas in 1900 killed 8,000. And more recently, as you know, has been the terrible tsunami of Southeast Asia, where thousands of lives were lost and where relief efforts are still needed." That's all I'm going to read from this quote, but they're just flat out telling us, and not everything is from our own day. He listed something that went all the way back to the year 79 with Pompeii, and he included that as part of this list of signs of the times. Here we have, at the time, Elder Henry B. Eyring. This is the April 2006 General Conference. "The prophets of God have foreseen the times in which we live. The Apostle Paul wrote to Timothy, 'This know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come. Anyone with eyes to see the signs of the times and ears to hear the words of the prophets knows that the peril is great. Yeah, that's what it takes. President George Q. Cannon, he was a member of the first presidency. He talked about that many times, how unless you have eyes to see and ears to hear, you're probably not going to even realize that certain prophecies are being fulfilled or that certain things are signs of the times. The more worldly you are, the more devoid of the Spirit you are, you're not going to receive that witness. You're going to be in your bubble. You're going to be focused on the here and now. And it's the classic, like the frog in the boiling water. I know it's been said that that's not actually what would happen to a frog, but there's the little story of a frog in water. If you slowly turn up the heat, the frog doesn't notice the difference. And so when it gets to the point that it's boiling, it's just like it's already too late. The frog has become acclimated to the temperature and it gets to a point where it's dangerous. And so he doesn't jump out. And I feel like that's the case with too many people, both inside and outside the church, where, like the Book of Mormon says, people are becoming less and less astonished at a sign or a wonder. Okay, and then I went ahead. It's going to take me time to update this spreadsheet with this new topic, signs of the times, but I added this one from President Nelson. So this is April General Conference of 2002. The name of the talk is The Power of Spiritual Momentum. We have never needed positive spiritual momentum more than we do now to counteract the speed with which evil and the darker signs of the times are intensifying. So now, with President Nelson, similar to other quotes, it's more intense right now. It's really, really the final phase. With President Benson, we're in the final inning. With President Nelson, he said we're in the last half of the ninth inning. We just read some quotes from President Monson and also President Hinckley, how look at the signs of the times. Well, now with President Nelson, these are the darker signs of the times. And then he continues, positive spiritual momentum will keep us moving forward amid the fear and uncertainty created by pandemics, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, and armed hostilities. Spiritual momentum can help us withstand the relentless, wicked attacks of the adversary and thwart his efforts to erode our personal spiritual foundation. Okay, so I added that to the spreadsheet. You have to go back to 2022. And like I said earlier, I have another new one that I've added to this, and it's also from 2022. It's from the next General Conference. And of all people, it's from President Oaks, helping the poor and distressed. This was actually the first talk of that General Conference, and I remember it standing out to me just because he went through this whole thing of everything that the church is doing. And I was like, that is so good, because you have so many critics of the church that complain about how the church uses its finances, how the church has a lot in savings and stuff like that. It's being used. It's being saved for a rainy day. It's being saved for church operations and projects in the future, but it is being used. So he says, despite all that our church does directly, most humanitarian service to the children of God worldwide is carried out by persons and organizations having no formal connection with our church. As one of our apostles observed, God is using more than one people for the accomplishment of his great and marvelous work. It is too vast, too arduous for any one people. As members of the restored church, we need to be more aware and more appreciative of the service of others. The Church of Jesus Christ is committed to serving those in need, and it is also committed to cooperating with others in that effort. We recently made a large gift to the United Nations World Food Program. Over the many decades of our humanitarian work, two organizations stand out as key collaborators. Projects with the Red Cross and Red Crescent agencies in dozens of countries have provided the children of God crucial relief, and here it is, during natural disasters and conflicts. Likewise, we have a long record of assistance with Catholic relief services, these organizations have taught us much about world-class relief. We've also had fruitful collaborations with other organizations, including Muslim Aid, Water for People, and Isra Aid, to name just a few. While each humanitarian organization has its own area of specialization, we share the common goal of relieving suffering among God's children. All of this is part of God's work for his children. So I thought that this was really good, that the church is not just this hermit in the corner of the world doing its own thing, but it cooperates with other good actors and in harmony to relieve suffering and help those in need as the judgments of God are coming upon the earth in the form of natural disasters, conflicts, and other things. Later on, he says the provision of medical and dental care to those in need is another example. In Chicago, I met a Syrian-American critical care physician, Dr. Zahir Salul. He is one of the founders of Med Global, which organizes medical professionals to volunteer their time, skills, knowledge, and leadership to help others in crises, such as in the Syrian war, where Dr. Salul risked his life in giving medical care to civilians. So before this, he talked about natural disasters and conflicts. At this point, he points out a specific war. And then the last thing in this talk is other examples of the restored church's humanitarian and other assistance that are also supported voluntarily by our members are our well-known schools, colleges, and universities, and our less known but now published large donations for the relief of those suffering from the destructions and dislocations of natural disasters like tornadoes and earthquakes. So I think it's telling. I'm probably going to have to do more research. I'm probably going to have to add some more words and phrases to this, like earthquakes, natural disasters. I don't think I have. Let me just check. Natural disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, tornadoes. Because I'll bet that it's been talked about more than we realize. And probably a lot of the time, it just goes over our head. We don't really think about it. But again, I think at least at some level, it probably does affect you. And you probably do, even for just a split second, think about the signs of the times and getting closer to the second coming. I wouldn't be surprised. I wish there were more hours in the day to where I could do even more research and collect more data, quotes, and make connections and make more spreadsheets. It's so much. I've been doing this for 4.5 years, and it's been a lot of work, but it's paid off because there have been so many things that have been revealed through doing exercises like this. Everything from being able to see that there are certain things that are being talked about more these days than in the past. And sometimes it's really dramatic. One of my favorite things, I'm just going to do it. I almost always point it out. Let's go over here. Let's go to, I'm going to have to search it. Well, yeah, look at this right here. Second Coming. You see how before 2018, all you had was just kind of like these pink colors, pink and light pink. But then you start to get the dark colors, starting with when President Elson became president of the church, with a peak in the year 2020, of course. And then again, I don't know if I've updated this yet for Second Coming for this year, for the October General Conference. Once I have that done, I'll give you an update. But this is one example, but the one I was looking for was, final phase. If this isn't telling, I don't know what is. Okay, here we go. Final phase. The phrase final phase. And yes, when it's used, the context is the Second Coming. So starts in 2020. You see it once a year for 3 years in a row, and then 3 times in 2024. And then I'm not sure yet about 2025. You go back in time, you don't see that. So I feel like that's maybe a hint that it is the final phase. And that, with what we just saw with the second coming, that we are getting close. Let me think if there's any other, stuff like this. Look, in coming days, preparing the world in a coming day. You go back in time, you don't hardly see it. Just think, sorry, I know I say this every time too, but just imagine that I could send this spreadsheet into the past. Like if I printed it out, because that's what they would need. If I printed it out and sent it back in the past, and they were to see these words and phrases as they show up by year in General Conference, they might come to the conclusion, they just might come to the conclusion that something has really, really changed by the year 2018, by the year 2020, and who knows what the future holds. It'll be interesting to see what this looks like under President Nelson. Look at this. This has been one of the hastening has always been a thing for my entire life. Like, it comes up. It's not like it's a recent phenomenon, but as far as the frequency of use in General Conference, it has picked up in recent times, starting in 2013. So here's hastening, here's hasten. You go back in time, you do see, hasten more often, but hastening, that's a gerund. So it's like something that's in the process of happening, hastening. The Lord is hastening his work, for example. You don't say the Lord will hastening his work. You say the Lord will hasten his work. But hastening is something that's like happening in the moment. It's in progress. So if we just look at column CG for hastening, you go back in time, there's not a whole lot of hastening being used. You do have plenty of hasten, but even hasten picks up starting in 2013. So, I think there's all sorts of ways that the Lord is preparing his children for the second coming, whether it be signs of the times that you experience yourself, or whether you see it on the news, or whether it's talked about in General Conference, even if it's in an indirect way, even if the focus is the church's humanitarian efforts, whether it's a sign that's specifically for Jews that they would recognize, or Muslims, or Catholics, or whoever. I think when this life is done, and I always picture that this is what's going to happen, that we're going to be able to look back and everything will be revealed. And that's actually suggested in Doctrine and Covenants 88, that in the millennium, everything's going to be revealed, which I don't know to what extent, but I would like to look back over Earth's history and pull the curtain back and see everything that was going on, all the communications from God. And I think that we'd probably be stunned just how much communication was going on. Things that you may not have recognized, maybe specific things for specific people. But I think that there's been a lot. I think that when the second coming does happen, we're all going to be left without excuse. We're not going to be able to say that we didn't see it coming. And then certainly by the time of the final judgment, when all is said and done, no one is going to have any excuses. So I think it's important to do these exercises, watch for the signs of the times, listen to the words of our prophets and apostles and general authorities and general officers of the church and local leadership too. And it's almost like that's all you have to do is just listen and live righteously. And the Spirit will communicate these things to you. You'll have the eyes to see. I don't think you necessarily have to do all this, everything that I'm doing. I think it helps. I hope it helps you. I feel like it helps me. But when it comes down to it, I don't think it's necessary. I feel like if you didn't watch YouTube, you didn't read any Second Coming books, you should be able to tell on your own just by listening to General Conference and looking at the world that the second coming is soon. But anyway, that's going to be it for this one. I'll talk to you guys later.